Today's episode of Newscast, the BBC's daily news podcast, is coming to you from number 11 Downing Street, the office of the Chancellor, because she wanted to tell us about the benefits of the new deal negotiated and unveiled today between the UK and the EU. So that is what you will see on this episode of Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the stateroom of number 11 Downing Street.
And Chris swapping the splendour of Lancaster House, posh place up the road near Buckingham Palace, for also the stateroom in number 11, which also has its fair share of kind of, I don't know, oozing a sense of statehood, doesn't it, with its chandeliers and posh carpets and chairs?
And you were passing through on the way to go and do the actual news. But before I have my chat with the Chancellor, I've tried to reconjure the Brexitcast vibe.
You've got a folder.
I've got a binder, and we played the Brexitcast music for this episode. Because, we're talking about UK-EU relations, and we're talking about it in a way that seems quite familiar from the old days, like big summits, last-minute negotiations, texts being exchanged, last-minute stumbling blocks. Is this what people voted for? Is this too close to the EU? A lot of those sort of thematic things coming out again. It felt very, very familiar, even if the content is quite different.
Yeah, so the choreography and the trade-offs definitely felt familiar. We had those kind of 5 years, didn't we, of talking about Brexit the whole time. And then we've pretty much had the same period since where we've barely talked about it at all, where the political class, where perhaps society at large was basically just lost the will to talk about it anymore, whatever people's original views back in 2016. And here we've got effectively a kind of one-day-ish return of all of those kind of conversations about trade-offs, late-night negotiations. Nick Thomas-Symonds, the minister responsible for EU relations, mentioning as he came into the news conference at lunchtime that his team had a Nando's late last night in order to fuel their nocturnal final negotiation. The signing off from the EU ambassadors on their side in Brussels at breakfast time this morning. And then the likes of you and me pouring through the detail, trying to work out what's been agreed in principle but not yet signed off in detail. What do they still need to really do some sort of really hard yards on?
I mean, I've got two big takeaways from this. My first one is just, the warmth and the fact that the UK is now looking at ways to cooperate more with the EU. Whereas under Boris Johnson and David Frost, Lord Frost, his negotiator, it was about how do you maintain and maximise British sovereignty and compromise kind of the least in the way that allowed that to happen. And second of all, so much of this is a roadmap for future negotiations. This is a big political declaration that points the direction of travel and talks up lots of schemes and lots of things that will potentially exist in the future. But I think some of these might be quite a long way off because there's a lot of technical work to be done. And I think we need to bear that in mind when people kind of claim economic benefits, for example.
Yeah. By the way, I've just noticed over in the...
There's a secret door.
There's a secret door.
Do you think the Chancellor's going to come through the secret door?
There's a door where the lower half is the same colour as the kind of painting of the wall. The kind of skirting board is the same colour as a bit of the door. And then it goes red halfway through.
And there's a piano. Sounds like one of my interviews. And then there's a piano behind us.
There is. There is.
Anyway, right, I've got my binder open.
Okay.
So the first thing so I printed off like this joint text between the UK and the European Commission. The first thing that I've highlighted is in the third paragraph, where it says, "We note the political agreements leading to full reciprocal access to waters to fish until," and then this is the bit I've highlighted, "the 30th of June, 2038.
Yeah.
What do we think's gone on there?
So what went on in the final hours of this negotiation, I mean, it's complex and it's multi-layered and all the rest of it, but there was a straightforward haggle over, in so much as a haggle can ever be straightforward, but a trade-off between two things. One was fishing and exactly how long that deal would be that the UK was willing to sign up to. A couple of days ago, I had somebody pretty senior suggesting it was in the region of about 7 years.
Right.
It's ended up at
Not 12.
It's ended up at 12. The UK was desperately keen to use the jargon, an SPS deal. This is about improving the capacity to trade food and agriculture, because they think that is just removing a friction that can be economically hugely beneficial.
Like fewer checks, less paperwork, all that stuff.
And whilst there was lots of other things in the mix, and our old friend from the Brexit negotiations, nothing's agreed until everything's agreed, etc., my understanding is in the final hours, it was a straightforward haggle between those two things. And you've seen today the Prime Minister and others really talking up what they see as the benefits of this food and agriculture deal, but they're also taking some heat on that 12-year fishing deal. To put that into context, the existing fishing deal, which has effectively been extended by 12 years, was going to run out next year. In other words, it had been set for about 5 years after Brexit. Government trying to make an argument, it offers stability because you don't have to have an annual haggle, etc., etc. And remember, the fishing industry as a proportion of the UK economy is tiny, but symbolically really, really important. It takes on an outsized significance, I think, in all of the conversations about Brexit.
Then we get on to what Keir Starmer, I think, would say was the centrepiece of this reset, as he calls it, which is the security and defence cooperation. From reading the document, to me, it seems like a classic EU thing of like inviting the UK to lots more meetings. I know there's more to it than that.
But then that is a key part of it in its own way, because the argument, and I've heard this from both sides, and this sort of stands one step removed, I think, from some of the haggling over other things. It's part of the mix, but one step removed, because in addition to the sort of water that's gone under the bridge in the last 5 years, there's also been just massive change, hasn't there? You've seen Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. You've seen a US president arrive in the White House with a transparently sceptical view about Europe's capacity to defend itself and willingness to defend itself. So that's kind of transformed the defence diplomatic kind of relationship between the UK and the EU to a point where both sides think it's mutually beneficial to cooperate. There are some who say, hang on, the UK's defence backstop should always be NATO. Why the entanglement with the EU? So this is the commitment to all of those meetings. And then in time, so the agreement says, but it's not nailed on yet, this idea that UK arms firms will get access to a European pot for defence procurement and buying of military stuff. In other words, there could be an economic benefit as well if British firms can then sell things to the European Union or European Union countries that want the kind of things that the UK builds.
And that's an example of what I was talking about a couple of minutes ago, about this being a roadmap to future deals as opposed to the deal being done itself. And then another example of that, though, is for months we've been talking about this concept of a youth mobility pact.
Yeah.
And working out what it would be and what it would be called. It's now going to be called a youth experience programme. What do we think a youth experience programme is going to look like?
It sounds almost like a fortnight in Ibiza on the beers, doesn't it? Or a theme park or something. Basically,
Was that your youth experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the word mobility comes freighted with politics, doesn't it? Because critics of the idea of a youth mobility scheme say it is freedom of movement by the back door. The government makes an argument, no, it isn't, because it's age limited and it would be time limited. But nonetheless, they've come up with a name that somehow manages to avoid any sense of movement, even though the essence of such a scheme would be exactly that. There's also a sense that because the EU is bigger than the UK, the likely inflows of folk from the EU to the UK would be bigger than young Brits going the other way. The key thing in this is that they haven't yet actually nailed down the specifics. So firstly, we don't know when it'll start, but secondly, we don't know, what will count as young. Alas, Adam, it won't include us. That's definitely true.
Well, initially, the European Union was talking about 18 to 30-year-olds for 2 years. Also, there's a great bit of diplomatic language in this document where it says the two sides will ensure that, quote, the overall number of participants is acceptable to both sides.
Yes.
End quote. So I think there'll be quite a lot of haggling over how they manage, because I'm sure there's some people in the British government would like it to be capped to a certain number per year, or a total number over the whole life of the programme, rather than it being a sort of open door to as many people who
Yeah, and I hear there was quite an argument about whether that word capped would feature, and it doesn't, as things stand, at least in other words, it is still subject to negotiation.
Then we get the bit that is useful for holidaymakers and business travellers, or if you're going to go and visit relatives, or for whatever reason you might go. I'm now going to do an exhaustive list of reasons why you might go to the EU, to see an exhibition, I don't know. Anyway, Egates at European airports.
Yeah, so this is intriguing. So on the one hand, it's quite a useful win from the government's perspective.
Because it's really tangible.
Because it's tangible, and lots of people, now and again will get the chance to go on a European holiday and may have stood in some horrendous queue that they may not have encountered in the past. The twist with it, and the Prime Minister actually addressed this directly in the news conference by sort of pleading in public to EU leaders, i.e. the leaders of the member states of the European Union, for them to actually implement this. Because what this is about is transferring the power from Brussels to say, effectively, no, make the Brits queue. Or, Brexit means things are different, so you don't treat Brits as if they're members of the European Union because they're not. Okay, we know what Britain wants, we'd encourage you to do it, but it's over to you. So let's see how quickly that happens, or whether in some places it happens and in other places it doesn't.
Well, and also lots of European airports don't have these Egates, so this isn't relevant to them. And you will still have the situation where travellers who are British are treated differently from travellers who are from EU countries because there's a different level of passport checks on them. And that's what makes the queues longer.
Yeah.
So that, I think that will still exist. The queues will still exist. Then we've got the emissions trading scheme, which is this scheme that the UK has one, the EU has one, and it allows companies to buy permits to emit carbon dioxide.
This is peak, Adam. I'm just hoping you keep talking.
And I was just going to nod to that because it's quite technical. But what is interesting for me is basically this document says the UK and the EU will kind of align their net zero goals. So say a future British government that wants to go more slowly than the EU on net zero, they'd be opening up a rift with the EU now as a result of this deal. And I think that's intriguing. But I mean, that's a long way in the future and very theoretical, so let's not major on that. Right, we're still waiting for Rachel Reeves. She's due any minute now. But just while we're filling that time, do you want to
I just saw something highlighted there that we hadn't really touched on, I think. Dynamic alignment.
Yes.
So this is our
hang on, let me show off. I did one Control F.
Oh, yeah.
It's mentioned 6 times in this document, dynamic alignment.
Right. So this is the idea, and Adam, you'll correct me if this pithy explanation is wrong, that not only if you subject yourself and agree to dynamic alignment, not only are you agreeing to today's rules, but how those rules might change when they are rules that are primarily, if not entirely, driven by and looked upon by the European Union.
Yeah. And in all these areas where there's going to be a dynamic alignment, whether it's the emissions trading scheme, whether it's going to be this plant and animal health thing, the UK is allowed to send its view to Brussels, but not to have a veto or a role in the actual decision about any future rules. So that's what Brexiteers are up in arms about. So just before Rachel Reeves walks in, what did you make of just the politics that was on display today when Keir Starmer was there doing that press conference with the President of the European Council and the President of the European Commission either side of him? What did you think? Did you think of that? What is like 2019 Chris Mason waking up today think about that?
Yeah, so I think this was the Prime Minister trying to make a point that says, you've heard the noisy, now we're going to do the normal. And this is what we do, and it might be iterative, it might be incremental, it might not be sort of whiz bang. But that's how we go ahead in sort of making our relationship a bit more normal, one that doesn't lead people to be angry on either side, although there'll be a splash of that, as there always is with these kind of things. And then sitting it alongside, as no doubt the Chancellor will shortly, the deal with America and the deal with India, both different from each other and different from this, but into something where they can make an argument after a rough old few months for the government of, look, this is what you can do, this is the dynamism and the muscularity, if you like, of what a government can achieve once it gets up and running. And, you know, that idea that the Prime Minister set out at the beginning of the news conference of kind of resetting the UK's relationship with the wider world. Some of that, I think, is the product of water under the bridge after the noise of Brexit, because you could argue that Rishi Sunak had a go at that kind of EU normalisation with the Windsor framework about Northern Ireland, where he appeared alongside Ursula von der Leyen in Windsor in Berkshire a couple of years ago now. But I think that's kind of, if I think we think back to our Brexitcast days and all that noise and anger and all the rest of it, and here we are 5 or so years on and the sort of vibe of where we are, and with the prospect of these summits now happening every year, and also inevitable that this conversation between the UK and the EU and our relationship with our nearest neighbours will always carry on. That's just the nature of the nature of our politics and our relations with those across the Channel or in the Republic of Ireland.
And 2025, Adam would say to 2019, Adam, bring the hole punch with you.
Oh yes.
Because nowadays, because no one prints anything off anymore, finding a hole punch in our office is like it's like the Holy Grail.
But it's only one day of agreement, so you might not need it again.
Yeah, I'm going to need a bigger binder.
Yeah.
Music to my ears.
And Rachel Reeves is here. Hello.
Hello.
I'm sorry we've shut all the curtains in here because the cameras and the lighting, we needed it to be a bit darker, but it's a beautiful sunny day outside. It's like being in a haunted house.
Yeah, it's one of the nicest days of the year, and
Yeah,
we've
sorry.
closed the blinds. It's
Sorry.
fine. Anything for you.
Oh, thanks. Right, I've got my binder here. I've printed off the documents. There'll be some people listening to this who love all this stuff and all the detail, but there'll be other newscasters who aren't across the detail, have forgotten all about Brexit and all the deals. What's the sort of simple way of explaining to people why you think you and Keir Starmer have done a good thing today?
What we've done today is made it a bit easier for British companies to sell things into the European Union countries, and made it a little bit easier for European businesses to sell things into our markets. And what it will mean for the UK is more good jobs paying decent wages. It will mean lower prices in the shop, and it will also mean a stronger and more secure Europe and a stronger and more secure Britain through the defence and border security work that we're going to be able to do together now. So this isn't about Brexit. Brexit vote was 9 years ago next month. That is sort of water under the bridge. But this is about trying to improve our trading relations with our nearest neighbours and trading partners. Almost half of our exports go to the European Union countries. I want to make it easier for great British companies employing people living in the UK to sell things into those markets, and that's what today's deal secures.
But I mean, we need to be realistic. When you say about it cutting bills in the supermarket, it will cut the bills on some food and plant and vegetable products that are imported from the EU. Like that's only probably quite a small bit of most people's shopping basket, isn't it?
Well, I think around...
We're talking pennies here rather than pounds.
Well, no, I think if all these things add up, you know, I think only around half of what we... No, actually, I'm not sure if I do know these numbers. Half of what is in your supermarket trolley won't be produced in this country, and the EU is our biggest trading partner. And at the moment, what's happened over the last few years is that the costs of trade between the UK and the EU have gone up because of all the rules, the red tape, the regulation. Even though our standards have never diverged from the EU, we still have all these checks and all these rules and all this paperwork, which makes it very, very hard and more expensive to trade. So that's why it will help British businesses being able to export into Europe, but it will also help reduce the costs of European companies selling stuff into UK supermarkets. But the other area where prices should be able to come down over time is in the energy market, because one of the things that we've signed up today is the energy trading scheme within Europe. And that means a bigger market for energy. We are also now negotiating a membership of the electricity market in the with the European Union. So it's not just about food prices. This is also potentially around people's energy bills as well.
And what would you say to people who voted to leave the EU in 2016? And okay, it was quite a long time ago in political terms, but people will still have those feelings. How would you reassure them that this isn't kind of going back in or betraying what they voted for all those years ago?
I respect the choice that the country made 9 years ago. People voted to leave, and in our manifesto we said that we would honour that, and there would be no return to the single market, the customs union or free movement of labour. We've honoured all of those things in the deal that we've struck today, but also we've honoured the commitment that we made in the manifesto to build stronger trading relations in our national interest. And similar to the deals that we've secured recently with India and the US, this is all about trying to support jobs in Britain, reducing prices in Britain, and protecting our security, whether that's our border security or our national defence security.
And are you putting a number on it in terms of the economic benefits?
So this could be worth up to £9 billion a year by 2040. That's about 0.3% of GDP. The India deal was worth 0.1% of GDP. All these things add up, along with the reforms we're making around the planning system, capital markets, regulation. All of these things are about trying to boost the economy, because if you boost the economy and get more good jobs paying decent wages, you can improve the living standards of ordinary working people.
Right, let's get technical now, because I've printed it off. I've got my binder. I'm back in my happy place. Why is it a good idea, and why is it okay to have done a deal on fisheries that goes up to 2038? And I notice actually that's the only date attached to anything in this whole package today is the stuff on fish, which gives European trawlers access to British waters for a very long time.
Well, some of the things are permanent. So there's no date attached to them.
Yeah, because they don't have a start date.
Well, no, they're permanent. So the SPS, the veterinary, the food standards agreement, that's a permanent deal. There's no.
It's still got to be negotiated, though, technically. This is a political go-ahead to do it.
Fine, but that will be permanent, as will the energy trading system. So two of the things that we've secured, which actually those are the two things that give the biggest economic benefit to the UK. It's the food and farming agreement and the energy trading scheme. And the good thing about those is they're permanent, which gives businesses confidence to invest and be part of those. On the fish deal, there's a couple of sort of parts to that. First of all, we're rolling over the deal that Boris Johnson secured with the European Union, rolling it over for 12 years, again to give certainty to people, but also for fishermen in the UK. We're making it easier to sell their produce into European markets, and 70% of fish that come from British fishermen are exported to the European Union, and now that red tape would be reduced. And also things like shellfish that we haven't been able to export to the European Union, we're now going to be able to export that, which creates new markets for fishermen in Britain. We've also announced a scheme worth £360 million to support coastal and fishing communities as part of the package today.
And I'm sorry to sound like a process geek, but I mean, the EU, Brussels is a process town. And I just want to know, what with the SPS stuff, do you have a target date for when the negotiations on that SPS deal will be done? And we'll actually have a legal text and be able to say, okay, this will be in operation from this date. Like, what's the target?
Well, there's no reason why we can't crack on, and that's what Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission President,
from doing it and finishing it.
No, I really don't think that these things need to take long. Our standards haven't diverged since we left the European Union, so we have common standards today. It's just about making sure that those processes are in place. Well, I've got confidence that these things will happen pretty quickly. The key thing was getting through these negotiations and making the announcements today. But the thing about what we've announced today, it's in our country's national interest, but it's also in the interest of European countries. So there's nothing to stop this from proceeding quickly now.
Okay, on the youth experience scheme, which is something that's still to be negotiated because the document talks about working towards it rather than actually agreeing it today. There's a line in this text that says the overall number of participants will be acceptable to both sides. How will you design that and negotiate that so that you're happy with the number of young Europeans coming to the UK?
So that is going to require a bit more work. It's not like the SPS deal or the energy trading, which are the Egates, pet passports, which are agreed. This is something that we now need to negotiate. Now, again, there's huge benefits for the UK here, for young people in the UK to be able to travel, to be able to work, to be able to study abroad. You know, those are opportunities that many young people have missed out on over the last few years, and it's a good thing to be able to bring those back. One of the things we're looking at is the Erasmus scheme, which for a few months, young British people could go and work in a European country as an au pair, in an office, in a bar or a cafe, and then those reciprocal rights for people to come here and then study alongside it. So those sorts of schemes, short stays in the UK or short stays in Spain or Italy or France or whatever, you know, we want to reintroduce those, but it is important that they are part of our plan to bring down net migration. That's a commitment we made in our manifesto, and so this has got to be consistent with that. It will be based on a visa system, so it won't just be anyone can come. You'll have to get a visa. You won't be able to bring dependents. You won't have any rights to use to access the welfare state, for example. So people will have to support themselves. So it's very different from the scheme we had when we were in the European Union.
But will there be a cap on the number of visas?
Yes, there'll be a cap on the number of visas, and that's the detail we need to work through. But there's other detail we need to work through as well. We're talking about young people here, so this won't be a right that everybody has. There'll be a cap on numbers. There will be limits on the amount of time you can come to the UK for, and vice versa. There will be a cap and a limit of the time that young British people will be able to go abroad for study or for work.
Yeah.
So that's a reciprocal thing, but it does open up for young people, whether they are leaving college or at university, to be able to access these things that a few years ago were much more normal. And, I think a lot of young people in Britain, a lot of parents and grandparents in Britain will think this would be a great thing for their children or grandchildren to do. So I'm pleased that we're able to do that, but the detail needs to be worked through. But absolutely, there will be a cap on numbers.
There will be a cap on numbers because that's not been clear up until this very moment now on Newscast. You talked about going abroad as a youngster. Did you have a gap year? Did you do that? Did you go and pull pints in
No, I didn't. No.
south of France or something?
No,
neither did I.
No, my sister did. She was on one of these schemes, actually. I think it wasn't Erasmus because she hadn't been to university at that stage, but she went and worked and studied in Italy for a few months. And she can still order drinks at the bar in Italy, I think.
I think espresso martini is the same in all languages. I don't know if that's her favourite drink.
Actually, sorry, Ellie. She's actually quite good. She's still quite good, actually. And it was a really formative experience. She'd just finished school. She was 18. She wasn't sure what she wanted to do next. And, she'd done languages at GCSE, but she hadn't then continued those. It was a great opportunity for her. And I remember being at university and people going to, study abroad for a year. And people get a huge amount out of that. So I think it is a good thing to bring back a real benefit to young people in Britain. And also, I think we all know that if somebody comes to a country to live or work, I went to the US when I was in my early 20s to work, and you do then make friendships, build relationships, and then always have a love of that country where you've spent some of your formative years. And
even if they put massive tariffs on you?
I loved my time in Washington, and I love America, and I'm very pleased that we got a deal with them as well. But my point is that this scheme for young European people to come to Britain, those people will then be lifelong ambassadors. Ursula von der Leyen said that today. She came to London, I think, as a student in her 20s, and she said that she's then been an ambassador for the UK for the rest of her life. And so I think forging those relationships is a good thing for Britain and all of Europe.
We should be honest here with people in that there's things you wanted that you didn't get today. Because I remember us having a conversation a few months ago, maybe a few years ago now, where one of your asks was for this thing called mutual recognition of professional qualifications. It's such a mouthful, but it's important if you're an architect or an accountant and you want to go and work in the EU or even provide services in the EU on a temporary basis. It doesn't look like you've got that.
No, and there are other things as well that we would like to achieve. We would like to make it easier for people who work in our cultural industries to be able to tour more easily and more freely across EU member states.
Yeah, that's not
but
in
the
here
point
either,
is, Adam, we've now committed to have annual summits between the UK and the EU, and also to have ongoing working group dialogues to take forward some of the areas where we made progress in these negotiations. But no, we haven't achieved everything that we want, and that would be true on both sides. But this is the start of building more normal relations with our nearest neighbours and trading partners. And I would in the future like to see that mutual recognition of professional qualifications to make it easier for our service companies to do business across Europe. And I would like to make it easier for our fantastic artists, whether those are musicians, dancers, comedians, or people in orchestras, to be able to tour more freely. At the moment, that is subject to a huge amount of bureaucracy and cost and time limits as well. So there's a number of areas where I would like to go further and do more.
Have you got your eye on anything else?
This is the start of a relationship. For me, those are two things that are very important, and those are things that I've spoken about when we were in opposition, when we left the European Union, and they're things that I would like to bring back to benefit our economy. But the point is that we have now normalised relations with our nearest neighbours and trading partners. We've rebuilt the trust that frankly evaporated in those Brexit years, and we've rebuilt that trust in our national interest to get a better deal for workers and businesses here in Britain.
I mean, Rishi Sunak, who used to live in this building, would say actually he probably did quite a good job of normalising relationships and building trust because they had the Windsor framework. But I'm just making that point to be fair to the previous occupant of this building.
And the Windsor framework was was very important, as was re-entering Horizon, which the previous government
The science scheme.
achieved, the science scheme, which helps researchers at universities and which Britain has benefited disproportionately from because we have so many brilliant universities and researchers. So look, I think that whichever party you're in and however you voted in the referendum 9 years ago, no one voted in that referendum to take Britain out of a research scheme. Nobody voted in that referendum to make it harder to sell shellfish or sausages into the European Union. No one voted to leave the EU because they didn't want electricity to be traded across borders. So, these are practical improvements that will improve our national security. It will help bring prices down in the shops, and it will create more good jobs for people working here in Britain.
Just a few other things. Are you going to look at expanding the scope of who can claim the winter fuel payment?
Well, look, when I became Chancellor, I think that most people recognise that we faced a pretty tough inheritance, and we had to take some urgent decisions in the first month of taking office to ensure that our public finances were in a stable position, because I made a commitment that I would never repeat the mistakes that Liz Truss made, which crashed our economy and sent mortgage rates soaring. I do understand the concerns that people have. We did increase the basic state pension, the new state pension, by over £450 just last month in April. We have put £25 billion into the NHS, which disproportionately is used by older people. But I will continue to listen to understand the concerns that people have raised. We are a government that listens, but we would always need to show where the money was going to come from if we're going to make any policy changes. So that would be part of any normal process.
But if listening then led to opening the door to more people getting it, if that's the right thing to do and it's affordable, you'd consider doing it?
Well, everything always has to be affordable, because this government will live within its means. I will never make a commitment to spend money on something without being able to say where the money's going to come from. That's why I had to make difficult decisions last year to make the sums add up. The previous government did not have a funded plan for the investments that it had committed to. I had to put that right both last July, just a few weeks into the new government, and then in the budget. But we have now drawn a line under the economic mismanagement of the previous government. It's why we've seen in the first 10 months of this Labour government 4 cuts in interest rates, and it's why we were able to achieve, in the data that was published last week, growth of 0.7% in the first quarter, the fastest growing economy in the G7. I know there is much more to do to improve living standards for working people, but bringing stability back to the economy, reforming how the economy works, and bringing investment back to Britain, including through these 3 trade deals, are really important steps towards making working people better off.
Sharp-eared newscasters will not have heard a yes or a no or a maybe in that answer, but politicians got a politician.
And journalists are journalists.
Yeah, exactly. We're all in it together. In a few years' time, if somebody has £20,000 a year to put into their ISA, will they be able to put that whole amount into an ISA like they can now?
Well, first of all, very few people are able to save £20,000 a year.
Oh, I know.
Absolutely.
But that's the system we've got.
Yeah, and I absolutely understand that. This is for people who are lucky enough to have that sort of disposable income. It may be that they've inherited some money or sold a property, but this is a very few people who can do that. We will still want people to be able to save, and I'm certainly not going to reduce that limit. What we are looking at...
You're not going to reduce the limit?
No, I'm not going to reduce the limit of what people can put into an ISA, but I do want people to get better returns on their savings, whether that's in a pension or in their day-to-day savings. And at the moment, a lot of money is put into cash or bonds when it could be invested in equities, in stock markets, and earn a better return for people. And so one of the reasons why we're looking at advice and guidance that financial firms can give to their customers is to make sure that people are making informed decisions about how to invest their money, whether that's their pension savings or their ISA savings. So those are things that we're looking at, but I absolutely want to preserve that 20,000 tax-free investment that people can make every year.
Interesting. I'm not sure whose phone that was watching. Was that the FA Cup from last weekend being played on replay? It sounded like that. And then last question before we go. You talked about artists touring in the EU and musicians. I don't know if you saw Laura's interview with Elton John on Sunday, where he was furious about the government's approach to AI AI and how the tech companies hoover up artists' tracks online for their AI models. He said that the government's behavior was something like, it was almost criminal. And then he said Peter Kyle, your colleague, who's the technology secretary, was a moron. I mean, would that put you off ever listening to Elton John ever again?
Well, we were very lucky to have Elton John play at our International Investment Summit last October, and
He's kind of
that
regretting it now, I think.
that was a huge privilege to hear him there. We've got to get the balance right here. We've got amazing British artists, and absolutely we need to protect their copyright. There's also huge opportunities to bring investment from tech companies into Britain, and also to help fledgling UK tech companies. And of course, they need to access material to learn and to build their models. I'm sure we will get the balance right, and it's always important to listen to great artists like Elton John.
Yeah, but are you going to take him off your playlist?
No, I certainly wouldn't take Elton John off my playlist. But as you might know, I'm more of a Beyonce fan than an Elton John fan. But yeah, he's got some very good music, and I was very, very pleased to have him at our investment summit last year.
Are you going to go and see Beyonce when she's here?
Sadly, I don't think I will be able to do that this year, but I have seen her a couple of times in the past, and she's definitely on my playlist when I go for a run in the morning.
Good. Oh, do you still get to go running, even as Chancellor?
Yes.
I'm not going to show me your Apple Fitness. Show me your Strava. I don't mean like that.
I went for a run this morning, very early.
It's better than I did.
5K. I was very pleased with myself.
You're now in the Newscast.
And I did the park run in my constituency on Saturday.
What's your park run time?
Well, this week it was 32 minutes and 46 seconds, which I was quite pleased with.
Good going, good going. And just to say, you're in the Newscast. That sounded so passionate. I'm so sorry. You're in the Newscast opening titles when you said you're not a Sabrina Carpenter fan. Have you become more of a Sabrina Carpenter fan since that all happened?
Well, if you've got young children, I expect that most of you will be a Sabrina Carpenter fan, and Olivia Rodrigo and Taylor Swift and all the others.
Chancellor, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So that was Rachel Reeves. When it comes to the UK-EU relationship, she mostly stuck to the government script on that today. There were a few things that jumped out at me. She was explicit about putting a cap on the number of young Europeans who could come over on the youth experience visa. I haven't heard the government saying that elsewhere today. She was very clear there will be a numerical limit. Whether her colleagues agree to that and whether the EU agrees to that is another matter. I also wonder if in a year's time, and that SPS deal hasn't been done, whether we're going to see a very frustrated Rachel Reeves, because I just know from my experience of EU negotiations, it takes a while to get these technical things done, and she seemed to think it was going to be done really, really quickly. I just wonder if they've got the same sort of timescales and same timelines. And in terms of the other things that were really newsy, the ISA limits. So at the moment, you can put £20,000 tax-free into a cash and the stocks and shares ISAs. There's speculation that the government was going to reduce that amount. Rachel Reeves has scotched that speculation today. She says the £20,000 limit is going to stay, although it does look like it might get divvied up differently between cash and stocks and shares. So there's still some question marks about ISAs, but one big question mark about the actual annual tax-free limit, that has gone, that question mark. And then the other thing was her answer on winter fuel allowance. Rachel Reeves of a few months ago, we've just said, nope, there's no changes to that policy. We had to take that tough decision to manage the public finances. Rachel Reeves today sounded much more open to tweaking it, even though she wouldn't go so far as to confirm that she was looking at doing that or that she would do it. So all in all, a fascinating, informative hour or two in number 11 Downing Street. And I have to admit, I've loved printing off EU, UK branded documents, hole punching them and putting them in a binder. And the thing is, because today is just the start of a whole load of other negotiations, I'm going to be printing off and hole punching a whole lot more stuff, which I'll then be telling you about in the next few years. But thanks very much for listening to this episode of Newscast. We'll be back with another one very soon. Bye.